Welcome to the Innovation Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Innovaccer, the health cloud company. We're on a mission to connect and curate the world's healthcare information to make it accessible and useful. With Innovaccer, everyone works in the service of patients like never before as one. Visit us online at innovaccer.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Innovation Accelerator podcast. I'm Rich Levin. Today, we'll be talking about growth versus loyalty. Which one wins? With Lisa Williams, Senior Director of Growth and Loyalty at Peace Health, a not-for-profit healthcare system with medical centers, critical access hospitals, and medical clinics located in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. We'll also be speaking with Gary Druckenmiller, General Manager of Consumer and CRM here at Innovaccer. Lisa, before we get started, can you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what your role is at Peace Health and what you and your team focus on every day? Maybe touch a little bit on your career journey that brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rich. So I actually started as a content developer, as a reporter, and got involved with digital early days, a couple of years before Google. I worked for a small internet company in Hood River, Oregon, and we were pretty quickly purchased by Egghead Software. They moved all of their brick and mortar stores online, which was pretty aggressive for 96, and have been in love with the space ever since. So my journey has taken me primarily retail and e-commerce, some travel and hospitality. And then about 8 years ago, I joined all you wonderful folks in healthcare. And I'm pleased to be at Peace Health, which as you shared is a Catholic nonprofit, 130 years old. So much collaboration, so much love of the people in the states that we serve, and really excited to talk to Gary today about some of the changes that we're seeing in the space and how we can help from a data and marketing perspective to make those journeys just a little bit better, make those journeys a little less painful. Healthcare, as you all know, it's a difficult and complicated space. And the work that my team does is really driven by a roadmap. And that roadmap is meant to really embrace strategic business development as well as the user experience, the patient and the consumer and their journey. And so I know we talk a lot about consumerism, but I enjoy my conversations with Jerry because we get real with, we can use the word consumerism, but what does that mean for people? How do we see them holistically as the humans that they are, with the families that they care for, with the imperfect bodies that we're all meant to care for during our lives, and how important healthcare is to the communities that we serve. So I'm really excited about digging into that topic with you all today.
Fantastic. And Gary, how about you? Can you tell us or share a little snapshot of your role at Innovaccer?
Yeah, happy to, Rich. And that's great to hear Lisa kind of go through her background. And I forget, man, the similar backgrounds that we've taken to get here. And there was actually a pre-healthcare life. Seems like eons ago. Like, what was that? But thank you, Rich. I'm here and I serve as the GM over the consumer health and CRM business at Innovaccer. And like Lisa, I've been in this space for probably a little bit over a decade, a little bit longer, but in the same kind of capacity. And coming out of a non-healthcare environment, which included many of the areas that Lisa crossed through in terms of hospitality, other sorts of consumer avenues, within agencies and retail and manufacturing, you name it. That was a great primer for healthcare, which is ultimately serving to be and will likely serve to be, when all is said and done, our biggest challenge in our careers. I think Lisa and I will both stand by that headlong. So prior to coming to here, I was one of the early members of a company called eVariant, which is where Lisa and I and a bunch of my other gang, we met when Lisa and her boss, still today at Peace Health, they were at OHSU. And then we went through a few machinations of different companies, including Health Grades. But I've been here for almost a year and a half now, really trying to establish this framework of what does a full end-to-end journey look like? That's the question on the table. And it happens to hit direct center into Lisa's world at Peace Health. She is trying to figure out the same thing. I think we've got mutually a good answer, and we'll cover through, I think most of that or a good chunk of it today.
And I think our listeners will find that the definition of end-to-end, um, as you and Lisa talk about it, is very different from what a lot of other people and organizations in healthcare refer to as end-to-end. So we'll get into that, and I would encourage all the listeners to hang around for that because it is a mind-expanding definition. So great. With those formalities out of the way, I'm going to turn the baton over to you, Gary. Take it away, and I'll be back at the end of the show to close us out.
Thank you, Rich. Appreciate the intro. And here we are. Finally, we were able to get this settled. Calendars and healthcare tech don't like us doing these things, apparently, but I'm glad that we're both here together finally, and we'll giggle and laugh our way through this entire podcast, I'm sure. So it was funny today. I saw a LinkedIn post. I can't remember who stated it, who actually did the post, but it listed a whole bunch of technologies in healthcare. And it said, the question was, which one of these is the most overhyped in healthcare transformation? And I'm looking at all of them, and I put a comment in and I said all of them, because every single one of these are working in a silo. It's not that any of them are wrong. They're all working in a silo. So telemedicine, remote monitoring, you name it, right down the list, all the hot buttons. And it hit me. It was like, that's the root of a lot of the problems. No wonder we can't talk end to end, because everybody has their own interpretation of end to end. So I think we're going to probably get through some of that as we go through here today. But today's topic is somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Your title is Senior Director of Growth and Loyalty. And lo and behold, here we are. We're talking about growth and loyalty. So I'm going to jump right in. Which one wins? And it's kind of somewhat of an innocuous question. Both kind of have to win, right? But where do we start? What are the priorities? Everybody's very eager to hear your answers, Lisa. So in 60 seconds or less, here we go. What happens when growth and loyalty come together? No, quiet.
Such a great question. So I think it's so interesting because in our past lives, Gary, and retail and e-commerce, we very much see that connection, right, between growth and loyalty. We don't think of, if I'm Apple or Nike, I don't think of this person's, me selling them one thing. I think about what's my relationship to this person. Where do they see my brand fitting into their life? Where do they trust my brand? Where do they want to continue to engage, not just for their own lives, but for the lives of their friends and families and other people that they serve? So I love the idea of growth and loyalty being truly that growth depends deeply upon people's trust and loyalty. And I think you and I are going to dig a lot into today, Gary. Trust. What does trust mean? How do we get to trust? And so I really see those two things playing together really closely and really well, and us recognizing that they're not separate things. These are all families and communities that we're caring for. And how do we see those things as intertwined and interwoven in the way that they are?
Perfect setup. It's the difference between being a ticket number and delivering a trusting, empathetic is the word that's really trying to get thrust into this experiential world that we're trying to create. Both of those together, that's for the organizations that should be most empathetic, of which of course they are, but they're not all the time. And I think that's what we're trying to get to. So then follow up to that, so let's start with growth then. So how does consumer growth in your eyes support the growing financial concerns for health systems? Because if we get rooted more in a kind of our, dare I say, marketing centric kind of the historical consumer framework, that's kind of what it was about. But man, it's 2023 now. We're past a pandemic. How has that changed? Because financial systems are struggling. So how does consumer growth support all that?
Well, let's start with the data points that were 18.3% of the U.S. economy. Pretty big space. And then we just finished just shy of 3 years of basically not getting paid for caring for the communities that we care for. So healthcare, when we say healthcare is unique, I can't think of any other industry where you care deeply and thoughtfully and with all the clinical expertise you have in the world to the detriment of your business. And so I think really digging into the fact that those realities challenge and test us in ways that I know all of our health systems are grappling with right now. I think you said a really important word, Gary, just using the word silos. I would really love for us as organizations to spend more time digging into what is the cost of our silos? What is the cost of data being managed, similar data being managed in multiple systems? And without those systems talking to each other, without the people who are managing those systems talking to each other about the goals they're trying to reach, and defining where there's crossover for those things. Where should we be having more collaborative and more consistent conversations around both the clinical and non-clinical parts of people's journeys, and looking at how both people and tools can be leveraged in a more holistic way to get us to some of that savings that we need to survive this moment.
Yep. What are some, because I have a few follow-up questions to this, because the growth aspect of it, otherwise known as acquisition, however, whatever term we want to put around it. But give me like an example of you applying exactly what you just said. Do you have a recent example that you've been working on or planning to work on here, maybe over the next year or two, that is in your mind is like a resident fixture in how you see what you articulated coming to pass?
Yeah, so let me give a past and a future example. So past example, we don't currently have a customer relationship management tool that would bring together marketing effort and our customers and our finance data. So we do those a little bit in silos, but that didn't stop us from really working closely with some of our partners in Epic on the clinical side, our clinical managers for cardiovascular growth. So we had 3 procedures, TAVR, MitraClip, and Watchman, that we had specific targets and goals within each of the networks that we serve. And really spent time not just crafting the stories and the content and the deliverables and assets for a beautiful campaign, but also spent time with the people in those groups. What do the clinic managers, what happens for them when they pick up the phone? How do they nurture the leads that we pass to them? And so that was a great example of us just taking a step back and thinking about how we can work more collaboratively and more holistically to meet our growth goals. So that was really exciting to see us set some pretty aggressive targets and meet those targets, just barely past the target last year. Future state, we were working on a big project called Provider Location and Condition Enhancement of Data Project, PLACE for short.
Is there an acronym? What is it? What is it? PLACE?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right?
Can't imagine what that meeting sounded like. Hey, that's PLACE.
Right? So this project has engaged most departments in the organization, executive leadership, clinical, revenue cycle, operations, our IT teams, marketing, total of about 89 people right now, and we're not quite finished with getting ready to test with our clinic managers. But those data sets, first we started with the actual naming of our clinics. Surprise, surprise, as we work in silos, things can be named different things. So if it's an Epic, or it's in a scheduling in a separate app, or it's on the website, or it's in Google Business Profiles, or it's in an HR system where providers who are being recruited are coming to learn about the clinic where they're going to work. So that data being in many different places makes it really hard to get to the efficiency that you and I are talking about. That future state is really setting us up to just manage some pretty foundational work, making sure that the clinic names are the same in the big digital front door, touch points that people have with us. Those non-clinical and clinical would be the preference. But this first pass is really our own external website as well as Google Business Profiles. Then also getting the relationships between the clinics and the providers and those conditions that people search on with a robust taxonomy so that people can search for things and they're matched with the appropriate provider based on the service that they need. And so I think that, really working towards the collaboration as well as the data governance that's needed for that project is kind of indicative of where we're going to go where we want to go as a culture.
Wow. All right. That was pretty impressive. So in order to pull that off, though, just one final comment. Or do you have today kind of a linear, because when you and I chat and chat with others, we talk about the longitudinal consumer or person journey, right? Like everybody's trying to pick out which. I'll just call it person because I don't want to say consumer patient for the rest of the podcast. But that would imply then you need a data journey established as well. Do you have the foundation for that yet, or is that something you're working towards?
So we're building that together with our executive leaders and our stakeholders, really recognizing that each of us has a different part of this puzzle. And, we talk a lot about diversity right now in healthcare, diversity and outcomes, social justice, and how do those issues from a healthcare perspective, how do we bring our diverse perspectives together to solve big problems? And that's where we're at in that data journey right now, recognizing that even though each of us holds a piece of those data points, how do we bring those data points together so we can see that person's journey more holistically? Because the moment we can see it together in the data, that's when we can act on it together.
Right. Perfectly stated. And especially when you're trying to get clinics the same name. I mean,
seems like a simple thing, Gary.
It's just so easy, right? You just snap your finger and it'll get done. That's the hard stuff, right? We for years, we've been talking about what we see on the screen, but I think folks like yourself, certainly myself, and countless others are beginning to realize garbage in, garbage out is an accurate sentiment for the work that we're trying to do. And if the hard stuff deep down in the bowels of health systems in particular is not ironed out, then something as relatively straightforward as your clinic names, your storefront names being similar, that in and of itself becomes an arduous task. And we kind of laugh at it, but at the same time, it's like, wow, we've still got a little bit of ways to go here. Okay, perfect. Great setup. So now we're in the game here. So let me kind of keep moving on. I want to talk a little bit more about acquisition, but in relation to some of the stresses that are being put on health systems today. We want to make sure as we're going through these, our Innovaccer podcast series, that we're very much in tune with the misgivings and the unfortunate characteristics of the state of health systems, right? It's not all, a shiny conference when everybody goes there and the lights are glistening. It's not, that's fine for that. But the reality is that we've got some issues to deal with. So consumer acquisition being one of those initiatives can, if not lined up appropriately, let's see if I can state this right, place a burden on physicians to balance capacity in the system and growth, right? Like being able to get those like within a margin of error, like 1% is not easy, right? Because it requires just a lot of connectivity. But workforce shortages and staff displacement have only added stress to that burden. So my question is, what are some of the methods that can help alleviate some of those shortfalls while also setting a future stage for growth and having what should be the better nomenclature, qualified consumer acquisition, right? To kind of get that balance a little bit more oriented. I'll hand it over to you.
That's a great and also very heavy question. I'm going to say something that's not going to make all of our healthcare leadership super pleased with us, but we're gonna say it anyway. One of the places where we have to grow as organizations who serve a large part of the U.S. economy is, what is your organization doing? What are they prioritizing? Who are your priority consumers and patients that drive the business and that you support in your mission or your organization? And let everyone in the organization see what that looks like. I mean, I have to say, I spent 2 years when I first got to healthcare, okay, I'm getting to learn what's happening with people and what the priorities are here. But it is really hard to work against a set of priorities when different groups have different priorities. So really,
then there are no priorities, right?
Everything's a strategic priority, Gary. Nothing's a strategic priority.
Perfect.
So it sounded like preaching, and it wasn't meant to be.
It's like a TED Talk.
But I really want to challenge our incredibly bright and incredibly taxed leaders to continue to work to bring to bear not just goals as an organization. Like, I'm really lucky to work for an organization who really understands who it is. Like, we know we care about social justice. We care about, showing up for our communities in a pretty big and powerful way. And we live those values really beautifully. But there are priorities that exist depending on where you are in the organization. And we have a better chance of improving and serving that whole person health when we all look at our goals in the same way. And so I'm really excited to see healthcare start to lean in to be able to define for the whole organization, whether you're on the clinical side or you are, you're on the marketing side, your revenue cycle, no matter where you sit in the organization, you see those goals up on the board. You know how you're doing every single day, just as if you were, a Google. And I hate to call that out because people don't compare us to tech, but there is some beauty to having some goals that we're all prioritized again. So I do think that's I think it's an aim that that I'm hoping that is a vertical that we continue to lean into that, Gary.
Good. And it is a heavy question. I mean, we're kind of iterating on multiple levels of priority hierarchy, meaning that most departments have, like you're saying, their own kind of set of priorities, but then within that is a kind of hierarchical structure that also gets in the way of the priorities being established, because it usually then can become department versus department. It can become sometimes people against people. And everybody's trying to do the right thing. Everybody's trying to do the best thing. But to your point, in some cases, and there's a lot of historical business examples, as you know, that demonstrate this, you got to just kind of leap ahead and not try to fix in its entirety everything that took the 50 to 60 years of fragmentation to get to where you are. Just jump ahead and agree on a commonality of a goal, and then back into everything else where it's appropriate. That's a tough thing for health systems to do. And the general nature of that is kind of gotten us into a little bit of this pickle, so to speak. So I'm gonna thank you for that. I'm gonna jump over into two areas that you described before. One which was CRM, and one which is kind of social justice, health equity, and I'm defining it here as underserved audiences. So when you talk about CRM approaches, and we start to invoke the notion of personalization and accessibility for underserved audiences, what does that mean to you? If there's any organization in the country, health organization, Peace Health, I know darn well, is focusing keenly on this, as you stated. Talk a little bit about that, how something like a CRM model that you alluded to can help advance the personalization, accessibility for those types of audiences.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it goes back to us talking about people seeing all the data points together. So being able to understand both the clinical and the non-clinical touch points that people have with us, I think puts us in a better position to have those conversations. Mm-hmm. I also, having just gone through a very screening procedure thing pretty recently, wonderful experience with so many great people, and very disparate and separate, and just tons of opportunity for us to be able to really walk that experience through, all the way from the initial phone call to schedule the screening, all the way through that whole process. And there are many touch points. And the one that I really hope that healthcare leans into, that I know Peace Health very much cares about, is health literacy. I just watched last week the Google Health's The Checkup, and I love that they talk about information as a determinant of health. It is increasingly overwhelmingly frightening to go into my chart and read those notes. it can be pretty
daunting.
Daunting is the perfect word. I also think thinking about using a CRM, and Gary, I know we've talked about this before, using a CRM as a way to plot that journey and then let people on the clinical side really understand what that might look like for someone. So even though, personalization, people want to think that, that means every single person has to have a personalized experience. It doesn't. It doesn't mean one, but it also doesn't mean 100,000. Like there are different variations and different variables through any type of journey. How do we account for that, both in the journey that the people have with us, as well as the content and the messaging that we share with people? And how can we continue to fine tune that based on what works in different communities? And so I love the idea that, as Peace Health has leaned into serving, the nuns came to make sure that loggers had healthcare. And as Peace Health has evolved, we're continuing to care for families and communities in the Pacific Northwest. And how do we continue to make sure that every touch point that they have with us is full of the care and courageous compassion that we know our leaders and our nuns and the whole organization, Catholic or no, that everyone aspires to as a Peace Health caregiver.
I love that. I love that phrase. I'm going to steal it. The notion of information being kind of the empowering factor, information equaling, another term you used is content. Of course, somebody with your background would state that, but then messaging, context, syntax, urban versus rural. I mean, all of this ultimately comes into play, right? If your healthcare is that individualistic, then should be the iterations and the machinations of how that dialogue meets your level of individuality to help improve the behavior of your health. And these are almost afterthoughts in the grand scheme of things, right? And we talk often about this framing of this, and it's an approach. One day, I hope will become somewhat in somewhat insidious reality. Is this notion of being one-to-one, right? And applying that into a health framework. What does that even look like? Well, the one primer with all of that, particularly for those types of audiences who are, suffering the most, and they are, is finding the perfect angle of entry in that gives them purpose to respond and gives them reason to take action. And all of that is rooted in how you talk and how that information flows through them in a way that they can understand and isn't just generalized for the population, right? What an amazing breach we will have there. In order to do that, touching on one of the things that we mentioned before, and I think you would agree with this, and a simple head nod will do, content is data and data is content, right? Okay. So in that, how do these become kind of mixed? And so my next question kind of begins to lead a little bit now into data management. And we'll come back to content in varying different ways as well. But part of our story as we talk about which one will win, growth or loyalty, there's a middle, right? There's growth at the beginning, there's loyalty at the end, but then you got these harmonics of satisfaction that kind of fulfill in the center, which is the bridge. And nay, do these three intricacies, sleep well at night together. So data management and analytics have become critical to some of these acquisition performance levels. Access, driving experience and satisfaction at the top of the funnel. But what are some of the more recent and popular performance metrics that help you better define success in acquisition, specifically around consumer experience? And then we'll start moving across the bridge a little bit, if that question makes sense.
So I love that question. And I want to dig in a little bit on kind of the survey information and how we gather voice of the customer. I'll give an example. When I worked at Oregon Health and Science University, one of the first things that we would do in e-commerce or retail is, focus groups for sure, but go to the customer service team go to the call centers, give me the top 100 questions that your customers ask them, and then make sure that we've spent time elegantly, simply answering those questions. And so the question, when I started trying to, we didn't have a single call center at the time, but when I started trying to suss out what those, having those discussions with the right people, the question people asked was, why do I have to have a referral? I'm pretty sure I know what's the matter with me. Why do I have to go through this long, extended experience of going to my primary care provider and waiting for them to sign a specialist? And we had not a single word of content about that thing. And so I love the idea of gathering voice of the customer, however you can get it. Get it to those first-party surveys, overlay it with those third-party surveys, pull it from your chat data. Right now, we're just using, we're expanding on our AI chat. We just use dialogues for COVID, but we're expanding to include a lot of other topics. And in no other place do we know so much and yet so little about the people that we're serving. And I really have that content, that reporter, researcher in me really wants those answers, but also the strategist who wants to improve those whole person experiences wants better access to that information.
And so then you collect all this information, and of course the next logical, reasonable question is, what do you do with it? So do you have a framework? Do you have a framework for how it gets dispersed? Any sort of kind of process quality improvement to kind of regenerate what people are saying back into the system? I'm really, that's a side question, but I am curious.
Yeah. So as we're starting to, and again, we have a wonderful patient experience team, and they're focused most on those first party surveys. We're starting to bring together, like, this is what we hear in third party, what we hear in Google Business Profiles, in QA, and in reviews, and other, really voluminous feedback in other digital front doors, and bring that data together and say, boy, it seems like, call times are, how long it takes us to pick up the phone really seem to be an issue for this specific region or clinic or a particular specialty. What can we do to improve that? And again, being really careful. I know sometimes in healthcare, we're all in our silos, and I can stand over here and say, why is somebody not picking up the phone? It's rarely because people don't know how to do it. It's because we're having difficulties, as you called out early on, Gary. We're having difficulties staffing. We're having difficulties just making the business of healthcare work in a way that we can substantively answer questions for people and answer that phone in a timely manner. It has nothing to do with people not caring enough to want to do that. It's that we're not making decisions within a roadmap that get us to that point to deal with that, either that dissatisfaction or that opportunity for better experiences.
And the glue, I think this is why that term journey has become so innocuous with innovation, transformation. It because at the end of the day, and my whole kind of jumping ahead ideology, that's the glue, right? And I've said this, and I think on most of these that I've done at Innovaccer to date, and I know I definitely said it in my previous life, but it harkens back to the old Steve Jobs quote, where he's kind of like one of my idols, where he said, you got to start with the experience and back into the technology, not the other way around. Right? So because you have to understand the proclivity for this and what it looks like and what you can reach for and strive for based upon exactly what you just said, their expectations of you versus the other way around. And then once you see it and you say, that's best case, like for an orthopedic journey, you can literally map it out. You could probably sit there right now and just write it out yourself. Right? But yeah, of course, you got to now get the whole entire organization to kind of buy into it, but you can do it. But imagine if, going back to your other point, if this was established as an objective goal, like we want to be able to do this. Let's just start with orthopedics. What would it take in order to unify that bind? Who do we need to work with? What workflows would need to come together? What departments would need to start working more closely together? It changes the effect of everything, which is why we're all, people like you, me, and others, we're always just aspiring, just figure out the journey and then back into your problems. Don't take your problems into the journey, right?
I love that.
It's just a complete mental vortex. So as promised, that lined up, and so, but I'm really, I guess, asking, and this is now more of a question back to you. How do those metrics then, and now we're moving kind of away out of acquisition and out of growth, which we've now talked about here for a few minutes, and getting more into the other side. How do those metrics, how does your scoring, your collecting of this information early on in the stages affect your notions of patient experience and retention? What benefit do they gain by you doing exactly what a digital marketer in 2023 should be doing, collecting feedback and then doing something with it? How do they benefit by you looking at it, assessing it, and then reinterpreting it back out into the market?
So I'm sure you've probably seen the Venn diagram of kind of the dream state for marketing, right? Like these are our strategic business development goals. This is how we run the business. This is how we are profitable. I know that word is not always loved in healthcare, but I love the saying of no margin, no mission. Like we want to appropriately care for the people in our communities, and we can best do that by really minding those experiences. And so that strategic business development goals, and then bringing that super close to what people need from us. So what would it look like if those Venn diagrams were really, really close? Instead of I'm a ortho doc, or I'm a partner potentially for ortho, and I have my needs over here, and then we've got our potential ortho patients' needs over here. Who's picking up the phone? How do we answer the phone? Is there connection between the way a person is told to engage with us, which frankly, that's really tough, that every experience I have as a consumer, I have to think, where do I want to go? There's not one place that I can start with and say, I'm a person coming to you, healthcare system, guide me through it. I'm kind of expected to do some of that guiding on my own, but yet those guide points are not incredibly intuitive. And that goes back to that kind of determinants of health piece. So, but I want to also kind of marry that, Gary, with what you talked about for metrics. That's also a place where I feel like we have space and opportunity to grow. Because if the metric, honestly, right now, the key results that we're tracking, we don't have online scheduling really substantively yet. We do have some telehealth, which for all of us grew because of COVID and then has contracted based on, surprise, surprise, what's most convenient for me.
Couldn't see that one coming. If there was ever, it's so funny you mentioned this because I was thinking about this morning. If there ever was a case of not, we got thrust into it at the moment, not to break your thought, but then of a technology that they suspected would just go forever. No, the consumer decided no. The patient decided no. If there's any case of everything we're talking about, that's just crazy. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. It
gets me all riled up.
Yeah, no, it goes back to what we're trying to bring together there, that strategic business development need with our whole person, caring for them need. When we bring to the questions of whether it's telehealth or online scheduling, recognizing it behooves us to understand all of those diverse perspectives, so definitely the clinical side, the revenue side, the IT side, the marketing side, but also from a user perspective, all the people in that scenario need to understand that when your data is correct and we can tee it up in our digital front doors, whether that's Epic or the website or Google Business Profiles, and people can schedule it where they're natively searching, whether that's in Google or in Epic or in the journeys that we present to them, we will be able to start seeing those things more cohesively and having metrics that we can all agree upon. So if the metric is, like I said, our key results right now, we don't have much in the way of online scheduling. We have some telehealth. I talked to a lot of cohorts, academic medical centers, other health systems, people who are in my role. And there aren't really clear metrics around what success looks like. Sometimes it's total charges if you're ortho, which is helpful. new patients, moms. Like if I were to pretend I came from retail and I came into healthcare and I said, who do I care about? Boy, I'd spend a lot of time on that journey. Because if mom comes to us, has a great experience, is cared for deeply throughout her journey, is given information to help her with this most exciting and most terrifying of journeys she will ever be on in her life, she and her whole family. If we were doing that right for her and then showing her what it looks like when she's caring for other people in her family. I know we use that saying a lot about mom is the CEO of the household. Regardless of who that is, recognition that she has a lot of say in how, where we engage, because she's often the person that is doing the driving, the calling, the following up, the reading the lab results. So whoever that is in your family, whether that's mom or dad or caregiver or parent, really trying to understand again how information is helping them do that job of being the CEO of the healthcare of the family more effectively, more efficiently, with less jargon, less confusion. I think that's a great metric for us to lean towards. Right now, our metrics are pretty basic. It's calls. How many calls have we generated in our digital front doors? How many times have people completed forms to say they want to request an appointment or they want to better understand a particular treatment? And so I think we have a lot of maturation to do in the way of what those metrics look like. But again, I think the biggest leap for us will be seeing those metrics in the same way, that I see them in the same way in marketing as my partners in operations, as my partners on the clinical side.
Sounds like a pediatric or primary care program to me. The
Maybe.
CEO of the house program. Dear mom.
Doesn't always have to be mom, but she's often on the hook.
Yeah, it's definitely in the majority. I'll give you that. Yeah, we've talked admirably about that for years, and it hasn't broken rank much at all. But no, you're absolutely right. It's all of that is kind of meant to again kind of really think about how as you noted, kind of how these relevant kind of communications are commiserate. And it's okay to start with a group, but then every person within the group will be different. So nobody's saying you're going to jump right to the whole notion of that one-to-one concept. You're going to start at these higher levels, and you're going to, like any good technology, iterate, 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 and iterate. But you have to pick a starting point. And what I find that most still struggle with is this notion of a starting point. But it's good to see where these effects can go. So let's keep moving kind of across this horizon. And I'm going to get into a blended type of discussion here a little bit between how our worlds are now intersecting with the at-risk kind of pop health world, right? Which is one that is entirely seeking the minds of folks like yourself in order to deliver on what arguably is the third promise of the population health dominion, which is patient engagement. Most health systems would arguably and somewhat frightfully state that they don't really do a good job at that, which is troublesome, because the whole notion of pop health and value-based care is to change the behavior of a person so they can naturally improve their health on their own over time. And this could span generations, right? It really could. To change somebody's attitude on something takes a long time, especially when you're talking behavior. It takes a long time. So as we continue to get better at kind of aggregating this data, and you've mentioned several times whole person care. Well, in order to do that, you have to know the entirety of a person, not just their clinical forbearance, their as we said, their behaviors, their mental state, their socioeconomic criteria. All of these things come into play to devise what your health life will look like. And some of it, unfortunately, you can't push against. And this is where we run into these struggles. So when we talk about collecting all this information, And the terming is like stratifying into high risk, low risk, or rising risk. These are common terms now in healthcare, so that the conditions can be managed, closing gaps can happen, and we can improve wellness over time, born and unborn. What are some examples in your eyes of patient engagement that can be deployed through you predominantly, because you're going to be the one driving all this, to not only close those gaps a little bit more quickly, but then here's the big word, proactively, and perhaps simultaneously improve methods to provide methods to improve wellness. And here's the first time we're using this term, loyalty. How does patient engagement help close some of these gaps, begin to deliver on the promise of something like population health, which is a significant going concern now, never going away, and then drive to loyalty? How does that connection through your eyes happen?
So I love this question for a couple of reasons. One, man, does it feel great to be in a vertical where that's our mission now?
It's unbelievable.
We're not just transacting.
It only took 15 years to get here, 20 years to get here, but we're here.
Like that's a beautiful thing that we are incentivized to keep people healthy. Like that makes the mission just feel that much more.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. One of the ways I think we do that is recognizing that those communications, as you pointed to, Gary, have to be true. They have to start with truth. Because if I grew up native Oregonian, lived in, central Eastern Oregon, very rural, conversations that my mom might want to have with her provider, my grandmother, who's going to be 95 next month, who is still living in her own home, quite healthy. Dr. Pennington has been her doctor for decades, and he said, I'm sticking in till you're 100, Marge, so that I can go dance with you, and then I'm retiring. But a lot of people bring different expectations to their care. So that's one set of care. My grandmother's expectation is she has someone that she's known for a very long time. That means a lot to her from a journey perspective. Not fast forward, but like counter, you live in Portland, you've chosen, we have several very good health systems in Portland. What's important to me? Convenience is important to me. The location is important to me. So really, number one, trying to understand those segments in a way that doesn't have anything to do with us. Those segments are about who I am, where I live, who my people are that I care for, how I grew up. Like if I live in a small farming town, my grandparents grew vegetables, we grow vegetables. Eating not processed food is kind of, we love food, we grow food, that's how we eat. But there's, as you pointed out, there's a really interesting study done at Oregon Health and Science University, Dr. Fader and one other doctor, that talked about the health outcomes of children and grandchildren that had to do with the health and well-being of mom and grandma, which is mind-blowing. But to your point, those having folks that are incentivized to care for their families in a way that deals with, one, their aspirational, who they want to be as a family, as a person, and then the day-to-day, the realities of that day-to-day. So a friend of mine says, be brilliant on the basics. I think we could do much better just being brilliant on the basics.
I agree.
We have really good programs where we're telling people, eat this way, get this exercise, get this sleep. But how do we encourage and incentivize that? And one of the great examples was from DaVita. And they looked at data over the course of several years, and they saw that the people who were in a socioeconomic segment that struggled to get to their appointments, giving them vouchers for transportation to get to their appointments, increased the likelihood of them having successful interactions that improve their health and improve their lives and extended their lives. Mind-blowing. Just being brilliant on those, like what might it take to make sure, food, like are we giving And I know there have been a lot of really interesting programs that have been set up around food as medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the idea of us diving into that from a healthcare perspective. I do think we have a culture to change. I think less about who we are as healthcare and more about how we want to show up for people and recognizing we're not here. What's it saying? You're not my problem to solve. You're my community member or my patient to care for. So I think treating people in a very deep and respectful and gracious way, it's one of the things I love about where I work. Like, we don't see people as problems to solve or communities as problems to solve, but as people to deeply listen to and to understand and to find ways to improve those metrics of health that are really focused on nutrition and movement and sleep.
Goodness, I love talking to you.
So much fun.
So you mentioned no, I mean, I expect you to go to the root, but then you really go to the root. And many of the things you stated there hearken on much of what we are beginning to kind of hear crisply in certain markets. Not all. Healthcare has always been local. It went away for a little while, and now it's coming back again. Like that's a critical kind of pop health patient engagement type of orientation. But it's the second one, again, and this kind of leads into my other question, is you're looking at the different framing of information, again, getting to the root of a community problem. Big part of it, especially for large urban centers, it's diet. It's diet. I can't think of a more proactive, and you use that word basics. For me, I've always equated basic to consistency. May there be a health system in North America, or maybe any other social framework around the world, that does a consistent job of being proactive, right? Like, that's at the very root of population health initiatives. Because again, you're talking about changing behaviors. And as consumer-minded people like ourselves, again, the first thing that should come to our minds, it could take a generation to change a behavior. That's like 80 years, maybe 40 years, something, right? But it's decades to change the behavior of a family that is now rooted in a dietary structure, in a socioeconomic structure, A, B, C, D, right down the line, right? And you can't just snap your finger, but you can start and then rigorously be consistent to ensure that they're getting that type of changing methods and ideologies about how they should look at themselves differently than perhaps those that are in their community that are influencing them poorly. Health systems have a responsibility to do this. They are the community, right?
I agree, and I think many of our doctors would agree too. I think it's why doctors, nurses, I think it's why they do what they do. For everything that they are all experiencing right now, the joy of that particular act, just caring for a person, is something that it gives me hope, because I know it's something not only that they're really good at, but that given the right tools, I think they, in partnership with the people in our communities, would excel at.
I agree. And I do get excited. You obviously love the entire trend, to your point of over the past, again, I'll use the framework of decades of all the great physicians and nurses and traveling or not or local that have done just amazing work, particularly over the last few years. But I do get excited at the same time about the next generation coming through, those that are finishing up their fellowships. And like you say, they have advantage. They have of these tools. How are they going to use them to their best benefit? How are they going to use things like social media or privatized healthcare social media in a way that truly looks and activates much of what we're talking about in a way that it also benefits them? Because the last thing we want to do is give them more burden, right? We're trying to take that away so they can do everything we're talking about. These worlds intersect. I want to have one more follow up, because we talked about underserved communities before, but you mentioned, especially we got stuck on diet there and community, and rightfully so. But what are some other examples related to that, particularly when it comes to health equity? Because health equity as a term is newer, and we now have a lot of health equity officers, and I think they're also trying to figure out how best to articulate this from system to system to system. A lot of articles on it, but how do you see some of what we're talking about here? Patient engagement, getting into the community, kind of shaking up the content base in a way that allows us to consistently modify behavior over time. How is this proportional to health equity?
I think it really deeply relies on us recognizing that I think younger doctors who have kind of they're digital natives, they've kind of grown up with this. The ones who engage well in larger settings socially really do use the tools as analysis, it's sentiment analysis, as a way to more deeply understand people. And so I love the idea of us recognizing, what's it saying? Nothing about me without me. Sometimes it can feel as a patient that we're being talked not down to, but just talked to, not with. And I'll give an example from my own healthcare. So my heart disease runs in my family. My grandfather and all 4 of his brothers died by the time they were 55 years old. My father is now 70 something and he's still around. And he had driving home from work and was like, I just don't feel right. And because he had that sense of, he was told, having that impending sense of doom might mean something bad. So go to the hospital. So he goes to the hospital, can't find anything. They keep him overnight and he has a heart attack in the middle of the night at the hospital. Thank goodness he was there. They put a stent in his heart and he's doing great. Fast forward, one of my uncles is a doctor in Prineville, Oregon, just recently retired. His son, 35 years old, runner, healthy, young kiddos, dies at 35 of heart disease. This is like I am in a family who knows that this is a concern. Getting to the right information, how you care for yourself, recognizing when you have, heart disease in your family, what are all the right ways to address that? And I was lucky, we have a doctor that we were working with on our cardiovascular work last year, who's just a delight. And he would say things like, it's really exciting to see people go and because I told him, I said, Dr. Padgett, I went and had all my EKGs and my CAT scans and all those things done and everything came out great. He's, I think we forget how important it is to get that feedback of things are awesome. People usually don't go out and drink a fifth of vodka and smoke a pack of cigarettes when you found out things are going really well. So I think just being able to engage, finding ways, and it's not always going to be with our providers. There's some really good programs, CRM programs that allow us to feed that information. Again, that social determinant of health, share information with people so they can start having those conversations with their own family. That's where their trust is. And I will nod to Google Health for this. Like the future of healthcare is trust. Do I trust you? Are you just here pushing things to me? Or do I trust you to bring me and my family into the fold and have programs that teach me how to live a life that leads to longer health, better health, and being in partnership for those things as a system from a family perspective, as well as a partnership perspective, just the recognition that we are in this moment where we want to care for people to their health, not just care for them when they're ill, is really exciting.
So I'm going to tie together, eloquently stated as usual, I'm going to tie together that trust piece, which you brought up at the very beginning, to where we're at now. And I have one question for you. You can take this however long you want, or you can just say yes or no. Is then trust, which again, I will equate to words like empathy and any other sort of emotional characteristic, which again, implied is not typically outside of being like with the doctors and the nurses in the moment of care. Before and after that, it's not really there. Right? Just kind of doesn't exist. And it certainly doesn't come across very well if it does. Are those things a prerequisite for changing behavior?
Yes. And here's why. And I'm going to use, we just launched, Peace Health is just now launching our new brand, which for some people that just means a logo. But for this work, it really means demonstrating who we are in everyday life. Sometimes perfect, sometimes imperfect, sometimes getting it wrong, sometimes not, sometimes getting it really right. But it's also who we want to aspire to be. And it outlines those words of not just who we've been for 130 years, but like who we aspire to be. And it includes those words. I love that you included the word empathy and courage. And those play out every single day in places like Peace Health, where people are getting difficult news. They're getting exciting news. They're being asked to do something really difficult. They're being asked to change a behavior that is really going to challenge them and their families. They are being asked to put a lot of faith and trust into a system that they don't always understand. And so I love the idea, Gary, that we have an opportunity to build trust. And so much of trust starts with both. I'm going to leap back into the data is content and content is data. Get your data right so that when I find your address or I look for your phone number or I know which provider is serving patients or caring for patients at which clinics, get that right. Get those basics right so that everything we build together, the information that you share with me, what you share with me in my chart or on my customer relationship management journey as a new mom, or making a decision about whether or not to have bariatric surgery, or deciding on a total joint replacement, or whatever those journey points are, build trust with me and recognize that every single point, every single journey, whether it's clinical or non-clinical, builds on that trust. And we won't always get it right. We will fail each other just like we do in every other relationship, but recognizing who you are as a culture and what you aspire to and what you invest in will help build that trust. And investing in better content, better data, that readiness of being able to work across many, many different operations, IT, revenue cycle, marketing, all those people working closely together is going to continue to show our patients not only that we trust each other, but that we can be trusted with their health.
Beautiful. Trust, convenience, empathy, no longer platitudes in our world. They're here. They're real. And for the first time, probably since we've got into this wacky industry, we have the mechanisms to finally do something about it. It's quite amazing, startling, and scary at the same time, because we're getting ready to cross into some worlds that are where before I don't think we could say this and not kind of be like that. Not really. We're having impact on people's lives, right? When we talk about behavior change, again, not a platitude. That's the goal. Make people own their health and be responsible for it in a way that is directly proportional to how they will cascade that in the next generation and iteration, however we want to define it going forward. 100 years from now, 200 years, 300 yeyears from now, what will it look like? Yeah, I say we start right now. All right, we got a few more minutes left. We won't be. I won't be here to see it, but I can see it. 300 years from now, I can see it.
We'll aspire to.
Right, exactly. Hey, if we're healthy, if we follow or practice what we preach, we will be. Hey, look at that.
Like Grandma Martin, at least to 95.
Right. Yes, that's actually the most perfect example of your entire story so far. All right, a couple more questions. One that's kind of puts a nice wrapper on the growth versus loyalty kind of. And again, we've clearly defined both are necessary at the same time. Yeah, it's a model that's evolving fairly quickly. And there was I can't remember it, but there's a McKinsey report that just came out, which is actually they really nailed it. I'll give them credit. On the 14th, March, we're on March 20th, 2023, and it came out on March 14th, 2023. Go check it out, but it really explains everything you and I are talking about right now, like almost to a T. So we planned this before that, so we're ahead of the game. That's how I look at it. But it's this convergence of end-to-end journey, but with a blend of what you're responsible for, of growth and loyalty, VBC and CRM as technologies. I don't know, call it VBCRM, right? So let's come up with a funny little name, funny little acronym, VBCRM, we'll call it from that. So it begins to then take, this whole population health world and I'll get to the question and really ask us to define what is a loyal patient. So that's my question. What does it mean to be loyal? Because a lot of people don't like that term in healthcare. Because if you're doing population health and you do it right, you don't want people to be loyal. You don't want to see them again, right? You don't want to see them again. You're gone. You're healthy, and I'm going to keep you healthy. No loyalty, but there is loyalty. So what is it? What is loyal to a hospital or health system? And there's no better person to answer this question than you.
So my friend, Ben Texter, who's with a company called Digital Health Strategies, he talks about, so I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of the patient and from the perspective of the system. He uses the correlation of like how we talk about share of wallet on the financial side, like share of health. And he uses Costco as an example. And I love this example because he's basically kind of teeing up, how do we engage with the health system? Like, I'm super lucky, knock wood, I don't take any medication. I haven't had any surgeries. Like, I've been we won't say how old I am, older than you, Gary, but old enough to know what show we were talking about, Laugh-In earlier.
I'm pushing 60, there's no way.
But just really, recognizing that being able to understand that loyalty doesn't mean that I see you often. It means that I trust you. So my relationship with Costco has grown over time. Initially, it was, I'm here to get chicken and a bunch of meat, maybe some sparkly, maybe some vodka. Doc, that's on my list once a day. And we are like, I see that was my initial connection to Costco. But then as my relationship with Costco changed, I began to trust them because they did a couple things. When they made me a partner, when they made me, I'm a member. First, I was a regular member, and then I was an executive member. And that membership meant something different to me as my relationship with Costco evolved. I get a percentage back from them. Then I sign up for some of their cards, and I get an even higher percentage back. I have people treat me I know what to expect. Like when I go into Costco, I don't expect somebody to keep coming up to me and asking me where am I finding everything I need? I know that's not part of the experience. I'm not suggesting we do that. But what I'm saying is they deliver on the promise of who they are very consistently. They deliver on just when I think I have all the things that I need from Costco, I recognize they have this other thing. I actually use them when I just bought my used Subaru Crosstrek. They have a program where they can, they tie into the dealer and they make sure that you're getting the best price and you're getting all the warranty. And so just really recognizing what does it mean to me to be loyal to an organization, to a brand. And that brand doesn't have to be perfect. But that brand, if they tell me they're going to be, and I'm going to use a word that comes from our campaign, that we attempt to be courageous. We attempt to have courageous compassion. We attempt to be empathetic, and we don't nail it perfectly every time, but I feel it every time I walk into a hospital. I feel it every time I'm in a meeting and we share a reflection as a healthcare organization. I feel it that it's the part of the culture that we have as an organization. And I know many other healthcare organizations are like that as well. They are setting the foundation for who they want to be, just like we do with our families, with our communities. Who are you? Who do you aspire to be on your best days and on your worst days? And showing up for people in that way makes them loyal. If I know that maybe I had to wait for 10 minutes on the phone, but I know my clinic, when the clinic returns their calls to me, that they're incredibly helpful, that they're kind, that they see me, they see my whole family, they see the needs of my community that might be different from a community in a different state. So I think that loyalty is really built on trust. Everything from getting the clinic names right and all the touch points that I'm going to see them, whether that's on my bill or on the door or in Google, or those other touch points that we know are really important. Just continuing to build that trust with honest compassion, and that frankly is a prerequisite for healthcare, combined with the expertise.
Exactly the answer I was hoping for. And certainly, as we know, because we spent not all of it, but some of our time today talking about the tech that's has to be put in place. It reminds me of just what happened like with Southwest, right? Like you want to talk about the most loyal brand, right? I mean, there are people that I wasn't one of them, but
right? They deviated from their culture. They
deviated from their culture, exactly, because they had the most loyal, and probably still do, but I'm sure there's been many departures after those few days.
Yeah.
But that's one of the most loyal bases in any brand across any industry. I'll just say in the US, because I think they're predominantly US. I mean, and just what happened is they didn't keep up with the technology. And sorry, we're in a highly commiserate digital era that's rapidly speeding ahead of us at times. And they didn't keep up with it. And they just broke their loyal promise within 48 hours. Yeah. And trust.
I distrust when your technology fails me. I distrust when your data fails me. They're so intrinsically interwoven. And the more we can do as organizations to make sure we're all working together, don't just say this is a health IT project. Don't just say this is a marketing project. You guys need each other. Your diverse perspectives are needed at the table to build that trust. So I love that you tied that technology into the core.
It's just it's going to eventually, ultimately, and in some cases a little bit unfortunately, but it's the basis because our life is now a Morse code life, right? And just like little pricks of interactions now is kind of how it's a TikTokian healthcare. That'll be eventual kind of like a physiological and psychological term, the TikTokian era.
I think you just might have just branded it. Actually,
I think I might have just the Ming Dynasty and the TikTokian dynasty. So let's let you get back to your day. I've got one final. This has been wonderful. You know how much I thoroughly enjoy chatting with you, and I think we barely scratched the surface. You will be back again, whether you realize it or not. But one final question for you, and you can answer this in whatever way you want, open-ended, kind of like we did at the beginning. If you could snap your fingers and make just one simple change or improvement in any aspect of healthcare, and I end this podcast with everybody with the same question, what would it be and why?
I want to lean on what you said of what we were saying about content and data. When you do it poorly, I want you to have to experience it. And I'm going to use a quick example from my early life at Surplus Direct. My team was responsible for writing all the content for the catalog, the website, all of our advertising campaigns. This was when computers were pretty expensive, so we had a leasing program, and we did, leadership set it up, marketing kicked it off, beautiful. Phones start ringing on Monday morning. You know who doesn't know about the leasing program? Call center. Not great.
Oops.
So when we create content or data that we're presenting to our patients to our patients or consumers with that goal of whole person health, if we fail, let's take a moment. Let's read it. Let's read that message that uses so many words that many people don't understand. Let's look at the address that is wildly wrong, or the phone number that is disconnected or goes to a different department. Let's allow ourselves.
That never happens.
But allow ourselves that moment, not to punish ourselves or to shame ourselves, but just to recognize, I want to do better. I want to show up for the person in the right way. And we're never going to get it perfect. But I think it's always good to take a moment and recognize where we're succeeding, where we're failing, and then recognizing what needs to happen, who has to work together, what technology and content and data and humans have to work more closely together to make that work, to earn that trust.
Beautiful. I'm going to take that answer and I'm going to segue that into the next discussion that we're going to have, which I'm going to get on the books sooner than later. this has been wonderful. We've been on for quite a while here, which is I'd keep going, but the marketing people tell us that if it goes over a certain time, we begin to lose audiences. See, I'm using metrics. You know how much I'm very much looking forward to working with you more closely. This has been a great session. Thank you so much for carving time out of your, what I'm sure is an insatiably busy schedule, Lisa. We will get back again, but for today, that's going to be our session. Rich, if you're back out there, we're going to hand it back over to you to outro us here today. Lisa, thank you very much for joining us at Innovaccer, and you'll be hearing from me very soon, of course, and good luck with the rest of your year that's forthcoming. I know it's going to be a busy one. Rich, back to you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say, you were talking about you think you just branded it. Well, I was thinking you just branded it when you said think bigger, because that's just 2 words, my friend, and that really does talk about the way what you were talking about. And the other thing I was thinking about is, as I was listening to Lisa in that last segment, was undercover boss. I mean, so many organizations don't actually test their own marketing systems and pretend they're the customer and call in and see what actually happens. Like, be the patient.
Job
Try
opportunity.
Being the patient. Yeah, right. They do secret shoppers in retail. We should do secret patients in healthcare. That's my idea of the day.
That's brilliant. Love it.
So I want to thank you, Lisa Williams, Senior Director of Growth and Loyalty at Peace Health, for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us today about growth and loyalty in healthcare patient engagement. And for our listeners, don't forget to check the show notes for links to resources and contact information related to today's show. And stay tuned to the Innovaccer podcast for more shows covering the healthcare IT topics that you care about. For more information on this topic and other healthcare IT topics, please visit Innovaccer.com. That's INNOVACCER.com. I'm Rich Levin, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You've been listening to the Innovation Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Innovaccer, the health cloud company. Don't forget to check the show notes for links to related resources and other information. And stay tuned to the Innovation Accelerator podcast for more programs about the healthcare IT topics you care about. Accelerate your transformation and build the future of health on the Innovaccer Health Cloud. For more information, please visit Innovaccer.com.